The story of resistance, the fall of mankind, starts with an introduction of how Chimerian virus spread from Russia and flooded Europe. Though its origin is unknown, it probably has something to do with biological experiments from 1930s. Those got out of control and affect in the whole country, being overtaken and destroyed by deadly beasts. A huge wall was built to separate Russia from rest of Europe and to stop the virus spreading, but in 1949 chimeras attacked and took over Europe in weeks. Remains of British citizens abandoned cities and hid in scattered military bases. The USA decided to invade Europe in 1951. Sergeant Nathan Hale is part of the second wave of this assault. The United States made a deal with England. We gave you soldiers and tanks. You deliver a secret weapon you were able to build. But the convoy with the weapon was ambushed in Manchester. Meanwhile, Nathan Hale is dropped in New York, where US Army battles with chimeras for the city. Soon, his team is attacked by small bugs that take everyone down and crawl inside their mouths. Hale gets infected with chimera virus. But it turns out he's resistant to the virus. He wakes up like nothing really happened and continues to fight the battle. Going through streets of York, he finds a tank and drives to an abandoned bus depot. US troops under command of Captain Winters must secure the landing zone to tip the battle into their favor. They would have succeeded, but chimeras sent 3 missiles carrying thousands of those little crawlers, and there's absolutely no way to defend that, so that ends the battle. When crawlers infect humans, chimeras send their carriers to collect bodies and transport them to conversion centers, where chimerian creatures are born. Hale was taken to one in Grimsby, same location that British soldiers from the convoy were held uninfected, but waiting to be infected very soon. Again, Hale wakes up with no signs of infection, and he quickly finds a weapon. He also finds British soldiers who are just about to be infected. He manages to save Parker, but they need to separate ways to get out. The conversion centers are built by chimeras to speed up the infection process. There also is possibility to use multiply human bodies to create bigger, stronger and more deadly beasts. The jetpacks on their back are cooling operators. As chimeras have 10 times faster metabolism than humans, they heal quick, but their body produces high temperature and they need those to prevent them from overheat death. Hale fights his way out of the camp and meets Parker. They are transported to Manchester and Parker notices that Hale has some slight signs of infection. But in Manchester, Hale joins the squad of soldiers fighting to recapture the convoy from chimeras. Soldiers manage to secure the place and go further through the streets of Manchester, but turns out that chimera was quicker and they already reached the convoy. Now it's protected by stalkers, so the army can't use air support. Lieutenant Mitchell and his squad are on their own, but Nathan manages to reach them and joins them in fight over this square. He helps to destroy the stalkers and take over the area. The convoy is recaptured while Hale is taking a closer look at this huge tank. He has a disturbing vision. Hale travels along with the convoy to Nottingham, where the British Army is trying to seal off a network of tunnels that Chimera dug under the city to attack undetected. Hale cuts off the Chimera anti-tank mortars and it turns out he is the only survivor from the squad. He gets directions to get out and search for a shortcut through the old train tunnel. Inside, he meets this huge mutated Chimera, but manages to kill it by destroying its cooler. Nathan breaks his way through the tunnel and that opens a key passage for the British Army to attack Chimera's positions. While Hale reaches Lieutenant Cartwright, he's already known here for his actions in Manchester. Cartwright's team found something suspicious. Instead of just digging tunnels, the Chimeras actually were digging something out of the ground. But for now, the main mission is to seal those tunnels. That drives into another tense battle with Chimeras. When tunnels are sealed, Parker tries to take Hale to the intelligence division at Northern Command for debriefing, but it turns out the whole place is wiped out by enemy, and while they get inside, a bomb is dropped and Hale barely makes it alive. Hale tries to find Parker, who connects through the radio and asks him to restore the power to the facility. That means a lot of fighting in narrow tunnels, and after Nathan does the job, he finds a map room where they gathered all the knowledge about Chimera they have got so far. He learns that actually what is inside this tank the convoy was transporting is called Angel. And those are the most powerful of all Chimera. Military believes they can control other forms of Chimera by some form of telepathy. Hale might be under the influence of one of the angels as he goes to search for the tank. When he reaches it, the creature tries to manipulate his mind. It's the same thing that he had seen in a vision earlier. Hale manages to resist the telepathy and kills Angel cold-blooded, proving that he is still more human than Chimera. But as his mutation progressed, Parker notices that he became quicker, and though he has some holes in his uniform, his wounds healed very quickly. Later, Hale volunteered to go search for Cartwright, who went after Chimera, retreating to Somerset. Hale breaks through enemy lines and finds Cartwright over the dead bodies of his soldiers. Cartwright notices that Hale is infected, but after a tense moment of hesitation, he decides to trust him, and they leave the place with a jeep. They drive through the fields filled with Chimera's fortifications, and through the heavy fire they found the way to safety. But since it's very unusual for Chimeras to establish facilities in the countryside instead of cities, the duo decides to search for the reason they did so. And there it is, another angel that instantly feels the presence of Hale nearby. But the real game changer is the fact that this tower was not constructed, it was excavated. But while they were driving back to the command center to report that, Chimeras already airstriked the place, so they only find what's left of it. Now Hale and Cartwright try to help evacuate the base, dealing with stalkers. The most important task right now is to defend the hangar at any cost, making sure all the transports will fly before Chimera takes it over. Hale manages to reach the landing pod and clear the way for the transport to fly off to Cardiff. Meanwhile, Cartwright captured Chimera Stalker and offered Hale a lift to safety. But in the bigger picture, Southern Command was lost to enemy.
Southern Command was lost. More than half our troops were lost with it.
Hale decided to stay and explore the power conducts tunnels that mostly run underground. Tunnels are filled with all types of chimeras, but Hale goes like a knife through a butter and uses the power conducts as bridges. And after a few miles, he finds a direct road to the Chimerian Tower located in London, a huge one. Hale reported that this might be the key tower of Chimera and destroying it might destroy them all. Parker manages to convince the US Army to run a full attack on this one. But first, Hale needs to deal with stalkers to clear the air for Americans. After dealing with them, Hale gets a tank dropped by Chopper to help him fight with the spiders, and that makes a way for more tanks coming. Looks like Chimeras also can alter the weather since the whole city is covered in snow. Chimeras try to attack tanks from behind, and to prevent that, the army must place chargers and blow up the tower bridge. Hale takes a defensive position to buy time for chargers to be placed on the bridge. After destroying the bridge, Hale goes to meet Cartwright on Southwark Bridge, but his team gets lost somewhere in action, so Hale needs to blow up this bridge by himself to stop Goliaths from reaching human forces on this flank. Hale goes underground and he reaches the bridge through an abandoned metro stations right in time to plant explosive before it's too late. He also finds Cartwright and they take another jeep ride to handle the remaining Goliaths. Finally, they break into the tower, but Cartwright gets wounded badly. Hale must leave him behind and proceed with the mission. He loses the radio communication, probably due to the radiation, and encounters Angel. Meanwhile, outside the tower, humans are losing the battle and will not hold for much longer. So the only hope is in Hale destroying the tower from the inside. He reaches the top and finds the main reactor under a heavy Chimera fire. Hale manages to shoot the rods of the reactor, and towers start to fall apart. Nathan escapes in the last second, and Parker tries to pick him up with a chopper, but the pilot decides to leave as it gets too dangerous to wait any second longer, so they leave Hale behind and fly away while the tower explodes in the background. So the plan worked, and when the tower had fallen, all chimeras died within minutes, plus the reactor caused a chain reaction that destroyed other towers in the country as they were all connected via power network. So good job, Britain! But as for Nathan Hale, his body was never recovered and the American military lists him as killed in action. But you know what? He actually managed to survive, and we see him walking lonely through snow and being spotted by a plane. Soon he is surrounded by some kind of a special force team and flies away with them. Sequel picks up the story right where it was left. Hale, the only survivor of the 12,000 US troops deployed into the UK, walks alone through the snow while being spotted by the helicopter, and the second he gets on board, he is injected with some medicine that puts him into sleep. When he wakes up, he meets Major Richard Blake, director of Advanced Tactical Ops at SRPA. Hale is taken to the research facility in Iceland. Turns out Iceland is already under Chimera attack. Helicopter gets shot down by Goliath. Only Hale and Blake survive the crash. They find a way into the base, but while they try to enter, a creature called Daedalus crushes the gate and escapes the building. Being overpowered by chimeras, Hale and Blake escape to the plane that evacuates SRPA soldiers from the base, and they fly to San Francisco. 2 years later, Hale is still the subject of experiments run by Dr. Malikov. Turns out he is on some kind of underwater base, and soon it gets attacked by a creature called Kraken. Kraken breaks the glass window. Hale is ordered to get back to the surface and extract Dr. Malikov safely from the station. Base gets under a heavy attack by chimeras, and apart from what Hale already dealt with in England, now they also have these drones, and they are too powerful to fight them, so he must just avoid them being guided by Blake through the radio. Hale meets Malikov and walks him out of the building, but we have to give Doctor a little respect as he's not one of those sissy scientists running scared. Oh no, he grabs a gun and fights alongside Hale. At one point Kraken shows up but gets stuck in the door, so he just coffee briefs the room a few times and disappears. On the surface things don't look good. Looks like Chimera is having a full invasion underway. Hale reunites with his teammates and gets to the evac point. While getting on the chopper, Malikov asked the soldier did they retrieve the viral inhibitors. And since they didn't, Hale decides to go and get them, but we all know it's just an excuse to have a chance for a proper duel with Kraken. Hale gets extracted to California. He is sent to the factory and his team gets ambushed on the way. Hale gets blown away by the truck explosion. When he wakes up, the battle is still going on. He manages to push the enemy back, but they need to reach the place on foot. While getting through the forest, one of the soldiers gets killed by an invisible Chimera, and this is a totally reference to the original Predator. And yeah, Chimeras got Predators now on their side. Well, not the real ones, but some of their units just act like they were Predators. To get to the factory, the unit takes road through a small town and turns out it's filled with chimeras, and they have one of their supply ships hanging over it, so that's too much for a small unit to handle. Hale figures they can use C4, but to blow up the ship it needs to be placed inside. If you have ever seen Independence Day, you know what's the plan. If you didn't, well, boys decided to steal Chimera shuttle, fill it with C4 and fly it inside the ship. When they reach the place, they split up and set charges. Werner manages to take over the control room and he guides the rest to the reactor. Hale reaches the bridge and learns that Chimeras plan to attack US defense lines in the Twin Falls, Idaho. Team sets charges in the strategic points of the ship and manage to escape, just in time for the fireworks. Next stop, Twin Falls, Idaho. Team still uses that Chimera ship, but Chimeras recognize that humans are on board and shoot them down. Luckily everyone jumped out before the crash. Now they need to restore the tower to prevent the entire perimeter from being compromised, and the Chimerian fleet is almost at the place. Not to mention, the whole territory is under their control. While walking through the town filled with Chimera cocoons, we learn that they don't need conversion centers anymore to breed new units. They just pop out everywhere like corn in the microwave. and it gets creepy as hell when you need to get through a lot of dark buildings or a train tunnel. Hale reaches the tower and that giant crawler shows up. Hale is having a hell of a fight with this thing on the top of this tower. Then he brings the tower back online, so it shoots the incoming ships and that prevents enemy master plan. But no rest for Hale, since he takes the squad to the Bryce Canyon to extract Malikov, ignoring the command that ordered him to get back to the base. Hale spots the leading ship there and soon they get attacked by Chimerian anti-aircraft artillery, so Hale clears the landing zone with a sniper rifle. They start looking for Malikov, but Daedalus connects to say hi and kinda warns Hale to leave the place. Hale doesn't care much about that, and boys take over the facility, but suddenly they are attacked by this swarm of Chimera bugs, so the only thing they can do is run like crazy to escape, and Hale is the only one who actually stays there to find Malikov. He reaches him and turns out Daedalus is also there, and he gives a short lecture about Chimera being an older species than human and they are much further in evolution process. Hale somehow gets hypnotized and loses conscience, or maybe he just got bored by this speech and fall asleep. Who knows, but he wakes up surprised that they were left alive, and Malikov, on the way out, shows Hale the original oldest forms of Chimera. Those are things that Malikov studied back in Russia, and he points out that they are pure Chimerian forms. He also assumes that Daedalus left him alive as part of a punishment to make his creator witness the ultimate Chimerian victory. Yeah, you heard right, creator. Malikov confesses that he took genetic material from pure Chimera and infused it into 2 human subjects. The first was Private Jordan Shepard, and turns out he is Daedalus. But who was the second? Well, Malikov says something like this.
I believe you already know, Nathan.
And I think it means that Hale was the second one, but I'm not really sure, so help me out in the comments section. Is Hale the second one who got injected or not? Anyways, they reach the elevator and the swarm stays away, so it looks like it's afraid of electricity. Hale and Malikov take a risk and lure the swarm into one of the generators. Malikov reveals that there are more towers and they need to stop Daedalus from activating them. Those towers are like million years old and Chimera's extinct back then, but thanks to this DNA roulette he played back in Russia, he kinda brought them back to life. So they are just picking up when their ancestors left. There's also a risk of Hale transforming into Chimera, since until now the process was delayed by putting him into inhibitator from time to time. But there aren't any here, so he slowly transforms, and that puts him in a tense moment with one of his men, Capelli. Team flies to Chicago, which is ruined. Hale takes his squad and clears the way to the tower. They progress through the city streets dealing with all types of enemies until a giant Chimera shows up. We are talking about King Kong size here, but it's far uglier. Standard bazooka doesn't work and Hale gets grabbed by this mutant, but he feeds it with lark rockets and gets thrown back on the roof. And few more of those babies fired on the sky bridge makes it collapse and knocks down the giant. So they manage to get to the tower and Malikov tries to deactivate it, but it turns out it was activated back remotely by one of the other towers. It's Daedalus who actually made the activation from Iceland. 13 hours later, Hale lands on Iceland. Judging by his looks, I guess he had no time to use one of these inhibitators. First, he neutralizes AAGs to make way for air support. So now the Air Force is underway, but it gets attacked by Chimera fleet, so they need to pull back. Hale and his men decide to take a desperate mission and enter the tower to look for Daedalus. Even getting near to the tower means a lot of heavy combat with overwhelming Chimera forces, but they reach the place and find the one they are looking for. He kills Hornthorn as part of his big entrance, then he plays a little hide and seek, making the team split up. He takes down Warner, and when Hale finds Daedalus, he kills him with a snap of his fingers. I mean, I know he doesn't have fingers, but he just made it look easy, okay? Anyways, that's something I really was not expecting to happen, like the main character dying like this. And then we see the towers getting activated. But you know what? Hale is actually alive. He wakes up looking more Chimerian than last time we checked. Turns out he's in Louisiana and Malikov is taking care of him. And 6 weeks have passed since the Iceland incident. Malikov explains that Capelli recovered him back in Iceland, but when he was found, the virus in his body had progressed too far. Malikov kept him comatose while he searched for the cure, but unfortunately, he didn't find it. So he informs Hale that he has about 3 hours of humanity left in him. Capelli explains that after Iceland, Chimerian ships rolled over SRPA bases coast to coast and dug up even more towers from the ground. Then the fleet started moving south and now they are hanging over Mexico. Basically, the US soil is lost and the survivors are running out of supplies. Hale goes for his last mission, and while the battle, his team secures a fusion bomb. Capelli tries to deliver it to the checkpoint. Hale meets Blake, who informs him that Chimera have a staging area on the other side of the ridge. The plan is to secure the shuttle and put a bomb on it. They fight their way to the shuttle, and Hale gets another call from the Dallas. At this point, he can basically turn into Chimera any second now, so Capelli almost kills him, but Blake talks to his reason. So the team flies to Mexico and land on the main ship. Bomb must be placed in the main reactor. Hale and Capelli clear the path and take down the cooling shields installed around the reactor. While opening the doors in the control room, Hale gets intel from Capelli that X-Ray Squad and Blake are not responding. Chimeras must take control of the bomb, so Hale must find it. Capelli guides him through the radio, and it turns out Chimeras try to move the bomb to the exhaust and dump it off the ship. As Hale tries to catch them, he is attacked by the Dallas, and the two have a fight. Hale is clever enough to lure the Dallas into the reactor site, where he destabilizes the reactor and uses the electroshock to kill him. Then he places his hand on the Dallas and gets hit by some kind of weird wave of power. Bomb is armed, so Hale has 4 minutes to evacuate. On the way, he encounters few more Chimeras, and turns out he gained new powers and he is able to smash them with the force of his mind. In the nick of time, he hoops on the shuttle and escapes from the ship. An huge explosion destroys the ship and all the other nearby ships. And the heat wave also reached the shuttle, making it crash on the ground. Capelli wakes up and gets out of the ship. He spots Hale standing outside and he walks towards him, noticing there are some weird objects in the sky. Hale turns around and he is no longer human. He tells Capelli they are coming and this is just the beginning. And Capelli shoots him in the head. So Hale is dead, and his blood became a valuable resource for the laboratory studies. Dr. Malikov found a unique protein in his blood and used it to create a vaccine, a cure for Chimera virus. While Hale was considered a hero, Capelli was accused of killing him and got kicked out of the army. He started to live a normal life, got married, and there he is, 4 years later, in the small city in Oklahoma, living a typical post-apocalyptic family man's life in the underground community. One day, they are approached by a Chimerian death squad. Humans try to stay low until they pass, but they got noticed and a battle breaks. Joe and others manage to defend the city, but Tommy Dean is missing in action, so Joe decides to go look for him. Tommy shows Joe a transformer outside the city. Meanwhile, his wife informs on the radio that someone walked into town claiming he knows Joe. Joe tells his wife that they are no longer safe underground and she needs to evacuate everyone quickly. Their conversation is interrupted by Chimera air attack that almost kills Tommy. Joe fights his way back to the tunnels and turns out that the guy who asked about him is Dr. Malikov. Joe is mad that he has been followed by Chimera and brought them here. Malikov explains that the bomb detonated by Hale in Mexico acted as a catalyst and power surge through the Chimerian tower in New York activated a bridge through the space and time. Since then, it has become a source of cold that slowly freezes the entire planet. Malikov asks Joe to help him shut that tower or humanity won't survive the next winter. Joe rejects and goes with his men to fight against the invasion, ordering his wife to evacuate through the tunnels. They manage to slow down the Chimera attack and buy the rest some time. When he meets Susan again, she convinces him to help Malikov, as this might be the only chance for a better future. Joe makes sure they escape safely and joins Malikov on the trip to New York. They use a boat to get through the flooded city. Malikov spots leapers that clearly evolved independently of the hive mind. Turns out there are actually many chimeras who live freely right now, and their society is divided at this point. When they reach the Mississippi, they meet a Goliaths passing by. They get spotted and the boat is destroyed. Luckily, they survived the explosion and the crash, though Malikov is wounded, but still they need to walk through St. Louis. Malikov is injured and he needs to grab a rest, so they go to the coal tower and there they spot a Beetle. So Malikov sends Joe to find it, believing it would help them to get to New York faster. Turns out the Beetle is pinned by Chimeran soldiers and Capelli uses a rifle to help the crew. They take him to their hideout where he meets their leader Charlie. Well, actually it took a few battles to break through the city, and turns out Malikov has already been found by the human remains and he is not looking good. Charlie tells Joe that if he gets them a power supply from a Chimerian dropship in exchange, he will receive penicillin for Malikov. Joe agrees, but he also wants a ride to New York, and looks like they have a deal. There's a dropship on patrol down by the river, so humans prepare an ambush to shoot down the ship. But it turns out 2 dropships came instead of 1, and a serious battle breaks out. Joe and Charlie manage to run away and secure the power supply. They try to use the gondola to escape, but it was attacked by Chimera, so Joe decides to jump out and fight to protect Charlie. Capelli manages to defeat Chimera and Charlie is impressed, so they decide to help Joe and Malikov to get to New York. While flying a VTOL, Joe has a flashback with his wife and son. It's rather a disturbing vision that makes him think that they might be in trouble. As he tries to convince Charlie to go check on them with his man, the plane gets attacked by Chimera. Charlie promises Joe he will find his family and Capelli jumps out of the plane. Turns out he's in Pennsylvania. Malikov connects through the radio and guides him through to the train on the other side of the bridge, where the two meet again. Malikov tells Capelli they can use the train tunnel, but a woman interrupts them and tells to come with her. She says that the train is broken and her husband can fix it, but he has been missing for a few days. You can tell those guys are some kind of a religious freaks, as she basically can't build a sentence without mentioning God, prayer or Satan. Anyway, the deal is simple. Joe must find the guy who can fix the train. The place looks more like Transylvania than Pennsylvania, but Capelli manages to find Jonathan Rose. He says that he is on a mission to kill the creature and he's not getting back until he does the job, so I guess we all know where this is going. Father Jonathan guides Capelli into the mines where the creature lives. When they find it, they are up for a battle in the narrow tunnels until this huge-ass Chimera gets stuck in one of them and becomes an easy target. Joe uses a technique he saw once in Chicago and feeds the creature with some explosive that turn the beast into a strawberry jam. Train gets fixed and the duo is on the road again. Well, it goes well until Malikov decides to break the awkward silence and gives a confession how he regrets everything that he brought on humanity in the last 3 games. He also decides to boost the team spirit by saying that they have a very little chance of succeeding in New York City and probably will die. And this great team talk is interrupted by a guy calling for help. He is chased by other humans and gets killed by a machete. And look at this! A skull tattoo! That must be a bad guy. And you know what? He orders his men to go after the train. So now Capelli and Malikov must defeat the train from rednecks with jeeps and guns. The worst kind. Actually, they are doing quite okay, but in the act of desperation, rednecks hit the train by one of the bigger tracks and it crushes. Capelli gets stuck and Malikov saves his life, but he gets attacked by the skull tattoo guy who kills the old doctor. Capelli wakes up in captivity. Turns out the rednecks run some kind of a post-apocalyptic UFC down here. Capelli is thrown straight into the arena, where he must fight with chimeras using hammer. He kills a few dozen of them, and guess that was not the scenario, since the skull tattoo redneck orders his men to get down and kill Capelli. But he deals with those schmucks as well. So, skull tattoo redneck decides to stun Capelli. By the way, his name is Mick, just for the record, but I'ma call him Skull Tattoo Redneck. Joe is woken up by a guy named Herbert Savitsky, who explains he's a fan of Malikov and he has a plan how to escape from Skull Tattoo Redneck's prison. Long story short, he helps Capelli to escape from what actually is a prison facility, and those thugs are actually ex-convicts who turned their prison into a stronghold and live day by day finding happiness in the little things that the anarchy offers. Capelli and Savitsky free other prisoners and a riot breaks. It attracts the attention of Chimera patrols nearby and they attack the facility. Meanwhile, Capelli duels Skull Tattoo Redneck and shoots him in the head. He manages to save Savitsky and few other people right before the place is grounded by Chimerian ships. Savitsky actually offers his help, but Capelli is like, take care, and walks away. Joe reaches New York on his foot. Quite impressive, since according to Google Maps it's like 3 days of non-stop walking. Walking in freezing cold in this case. And as you can see, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. Luckily, Joe finds some booze and a working radio station. He tries to inform his wife that he is in New York, but since Malikov is dead, he is not sure if he can handle the tower by himself. Still, he decides to go for it. He moves through the streets and subway lines filled with all sorts of chimera, including huge as spider. Joe actually manages to get close to the tower, but enemy starts a heavy air fire, and thank God Charlie shows up with a helicopter saving Joe from a sure death. Charlie says he heard his message on the radio and that his wife and child are okay. He wants to take Joe home, since getting into the tower seems impossible, but Joe doesn't want to let go and he has a plan to shoot down one of those terraformers, using it to destroy the tower. Well, Charlie actually approves that, and they just go for the terraformer, and under a heavy anti-aircraft fire, Capelli manages to jump on the platform and gets in. Soon he meets with Charlie, who says he already found the control room and set the transformer to drift towards the tower. So now they need to find a power supply. While Joe is on their way there, Susan decides to call and says she regrets Joe taking this quest. Well, I guess it's a little too late for that, sweetheart, since Capelli is already in the power room and he's just one huge-ass chimera and even bigger shield away from saving humanity. Joe manages to destroy the core and the terraformer begins to blow up. Joe runs as fast as he can to reach Charlie and get out, but he falls down the platform and a huge chimera is still on his back. Hanging on just one hand, he tries to fight against the enemies, and though he falls down, he quickly grabs a hanging wire and lands on another platform, but soon it also breaks and Joe falls down along with a huge-ass chimera who gets stuck into the power stream, while Joe is saved by Charlie and his man, who somehow managed to fly into this thing and grab Capelli. Falling terraformer destroys the tower and opens a portal that sucks it in and closes back. Then we see Susan hearing good news through the radio. Broadcaster says that the tower was destroyed and the temperature is rising. Susan spots a VTOL landing outside and turns out it's Joe, who hugs his wife and son. Then we get those broadcasts from Dakota and other places in the US and all over the world actually, confirming that humans are pushing Chimera back and turning the war in their favor. We also see some drawings of a Statue of Liberty being rebuilt, people celebrating, and Joe visiting Malikov's grave in a cemetery named after Nathan Hale. And that's how the game ends.